The greatest war in ancient Greek history, the Trojan War, was started with an apple, the apple of Eris to be exact. It goes all the way back to a divine love contest. Many years before the war began, Zeus and Poseidon, two powerful gods, both fell in love with a beautiful sea nymph named Thetis. They each wanted to marry her, but they changed their minds when they were told about a serious problem. Someone, like Thetis' son, born to her and a god, could become mightier than Zeus and Poseidon. To avoid any trouble, Zeus decided that Thetis should marry a good and respectful man named King Peleus, who lived in the city of Iolcus. Now that the husband was determined, Zeus organized a grand feast in celebration of Peleus' and Thetis' marriage. Eris, the goddess of discord, was well known around the gods as a poor and ungracious party guest. Indeed, she was known to start disastrous arguments. When King Peleus and Thetis were planning the guest list for their wedding, Eris was understandably not considered. Annoyed at being stopped at the door by Hermes before leaving the gathering, she threw her gift amidst the guests. It was the apple of discord, a golden apple upon which the words "for the fairest" had been inscribed. Of course, every goddess present wanted the apple for herself, and heated arguments ensued. After much debate and many tears, three strong candidates for the apple emerged: Aphrodite, the goddess of love; Hera, the wife of Zeus; and Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Who was really the fairest? The question was put to Zeus, ruler of men and gods. Realizing what a loaded question this was, Zeus pushed the decision over to Paris, a Trojan prince. However, he was unable to make a choice even after seeing each of the three goddesses naked. So, unsurprisingly, it was time for some bribing. Each of the three goddesses tried to win Paris' favor by offering him bribes. Hera offered Paris military glory, Athena offered him worldly wisdom, and Aphrodite offered Paris the most beautiful woman on earth. There could be only one outcome. Without batting an eyelash, Paris awarded the apple to Aphrodite. The most beautiful woman in the world was a queen and of godly parentage. The biological daughter of Zeus and Leda, Helen was the most beautiful woman in all the land surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. Naturally, all of the men from miles around came to ask her stepfather, King Tyndareus, for Helen's hand in marriage. So many suitors were there that Tyndareus feared his kingdom would be split in civil war if he chose the wrong husband for his daughter. He contrived a vow to be taken by all of the many suitors. If Helen or her husband came to distress, all of the other suitors were to come to their aid. All of the suitors agreed, and Tyndareus chose Menelaus to be Helen's husband. He also made him the king of Sparta. As Aphrodite had promised Paris the fairest woman in the world, Helen was fated to become Paris' lover. One small problem with that arrangement was her marriage to King Menelaus. Paris journeyed to Helen's home in Sparta, and while Menelaus was away, he took her to Troy. The abduction of Helen brought the wrath of Greece down upon Troy's head, and the city would pay dearly for Paris' romancing of a Greek queen. Menelaus returned home and, before too long, realized that his wife had left him, and left him for a lesser man. He wasted no time. Incited by his much more powerful brother Agamemnon, he invoked the oath of Tyndareus and called upon the help of all Achaean leaders who had previously sought with him the hand of Helen. And they all came, each the head of a mighty army. Men had to leave their families and their kingdoms behind to join the Greek army. Some came reluctantly. One such man was Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. His wife Penelope had just given birth to a son named Telemachus. Odysseus had been one of Helen's suitors, so he had to honor his vow. He knew that if he joined the Trojan expedition, it would take him a long time to come back home. When the person responsible for recruiting him came to his palace in Ithaca, Odysseus pretended to be crazy. He hitched a donkey and an ox to a plow and sowed salt instead of grain in his fields. But a clever man named Palamedes figured out his trick and put Telemachus, his son, in front of the plow. Odysseus had no choice but to admit his plan and that he was sane. He knew he had to go on the Trojan expedition because a seer named Chalcis said it was necessary for the Greeks to win. So Odysseus quickly set off on a mission to find and recruit the greatest Greek hero, Achilles. Oddly enough, Greece's greatest hero, Achilles, was discovered in Lycomedes' court dressed as a woman. Thetis, the mother of Achilles, was reluctant to send her only child into battle, so she dressed him up as a lady of Lycomedes' court. By using his cunning, Odysseus uncovered Achilles' true identity, and he was forced to join the Greek fleet. There was no time for losing. The Greek heroes assembled in Sparta and were about to set sail for Troy when a terrifying storm rolled in from the sea. The winds howled and torrential rains drenched the land. Calchas, the Greek prophet, told Agamemnon that the goddess of the hunt, Artemis, was angry with the Greeks. In order to appease the goddess and end the storm, Agamemnon had to sacrifice his daughter to Artemis. Agamemnon lured his daughter to her death by telling her that she was to marry Achilles, the great Greek hero. Her father sacrificed her to Artemis, who in turn made the weather favorable for sailing. After the awful deed was done, the Greeks set sail for Troy. As they were heading to Troy, they attacked the island of Tenedos. Achilles, not knowing who he was, accidentally killed the island's king Tennes, who was a son of the god Apollo. From Tenedos, the Greeks sent a diplomatic mission to Troy. Odysseus, known for his eloquence, and Menelaus were sent as ambassadors to Priam, the king of Troy. They demanded Helen be returned by peaceful means. The Trojans not only refused this, but they also threatened to kill the envoy, and only the intervention of the Trojan elder Antenor saved the lives of Menelaus and Odysseus. The message was loud and clear. If they wanted Helen back, the Greeks would have to come and get her through the use of arms. Odysseus and Menelaus returned with the announcement that war was inevitable. After many years of wandering, the Greek fleet sailed the short route from Tenedos to Troas and finally arrived at the desired destination. The first 9 years of the war consisted of both war in Troy and war against neighboring regions. The Trojan War was approaching the endurance of a decade when the Greeks' luck started to run out. Men were worn out and tired of fighting against the fortified city. Troy had been under siege for 10 years, yet the walls of the city remained impenetrable. Battle-weary and almost defeated, the Greek force was ready to call it quits. The Greek leaders were unwilling to turn back without the treasure of the city in the hulls of their ships. Numerous other heroes died in the following days. Finally, Odysseus devised a plan to end the war for good. He asked that a wooden horse with a hollow belly be built. Soldiers hid in the interior of the horse, which was then wheeled in front of Troy's city gates. Meanwhile, the Greek fleet sailed away to the nearby island of Tenedos. Then a Greek traitor was left behind to tell the victorious Trojans that the horse was a gift from the gods and was not to be taken into the walled city, else the gods' favor fall upon the Trojans. Of course, the Trojans brought the huge horse into the city, breaking down parts of the wall to fit the enormous structure through the city gates. During the night, while the Trojans were celebrating their victory, the Greek ships sailed back, and Odysseus and the others who had concealed themselves inside of the horse dropped down from the horse and let the rest of the army in through the gates. A massacre followed, and eventually, after a decade-long war, Troy fell. Once all the Greeks were inside of the city, mass destruction and chaos broke loose. The Greeks burned the city, including the temples, mercilessly killed all of the Trojan men, and enslaved the women. Menelaus found Helen. He drew his sword to kill her because of all the trouble she had caused, but the goddess Aphrodite protected her. And when Menelaus looked at Helen, He was so overwhelmed with her beauty that his sword fell to the ground. The Trojan horse was ultimately the demise of the Trojans, and still stands today as evidence that brains, not brawn, will often win the battle. With the sack of the city, the Greeks took everything from Troy, but mysteriously, the treasure of Troy was nowhere to be found. When the city started to burn, King Priam concealed the royal treasure in the wall of Troy, knowing that the Greeks would never think to look there. So the great Trojan treasure was not discovered by the Greeks, but by a German named Heinrich Schliemann in 1870, centuries after the city had fallen. The gods never forget and rarely forgive. The surviving Greek heroes will learn this the hard way. Although victorious, most of them will be severely punished for their transgressions. In fact, only few will ever reach their homes, and only after numerous exploits and adventures. Even fewer will be greeted with a warm welcome, either ending up being exiled into oblivion or finding their deaths at the hands of their loved ones, or in some cases both.